Well, thank you very much, Luis, for a very inspiring, very impressive presentation. I'm sure we're going to take years to understand that presentation, but it was very good. I'd like to invite Cleandro Krause, please. He's our Urban Studies Coordinator at the Regional Environmental Department, and he's also going to comment with us. Thank you very much. Yes. So I'd like to start with you, Cleandro, some comments and questions for Luis. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Luis. Thank you very much. I have a privilege to have read the paper, but
me too.
Bernardo too. So maybe some things I'm going to say now, you haven't seen that. But anyway, the list is long, so I will have to choose some of the points. First, I think that, this first question has to do with the setting the boundaries of a system, a problem that we talked about this morning. To what extent can we talk about cities, all kinds of cities in every social and political system, as being part of a single type of complex system? Can we choose, are there any degrees of freedom for including or not any specific city in the city system? And we saw the analysis has most to do with metropolitan areas, but what if we try to put smaller cities into, I will return to this point of the smaller cities in the end. And second, well, I was curious, I think anyone is curious to know where Brazil lies and where Latin American cities lie on the panels. Are we in the tendency line, or do we deviate a lot? Brazil and Latin American metropolitan areas, are we closer to a kind of sun belt or to a rust belt? If we were to compare to American cities, or none of them. And as we comparing both panels, the infrastructure versus population panel and the social output versus population, we see that it seems that volumes of infrastructure seem to have bigger deviations. Why is that? Is that any reason for? And I was also thinking about if regional differences can play a stronger role in infrastructure distribution due to central government decisions of investment, some path dependency also in this kind. So, well, I think this point of the residuals that are interesting in their own right, not only the tendency line, but if you could talk us about some residuals that could speak for themselves, maybe. No. Regarding the four properties that we must assume to the scaling properties of cities, in my view, I think there may be one of these properties which maybe in some contexts may be hard to fulfill. That one can in principle meet anyone else in the city, especially in contexts of favelas, slums, and other kinds of interdictions, maybe apartheid. I don't know how Johannesburg would scale. Maybe there would be some deviations here. And finally, I was really curious, since I've been at the World Urban Forum in Medellin, I was curious to know, I saw it. It was a great pleasure to see a session of Slum Dwellers International and the partnership they mentioned with the Santa Fe Institute. And well, the point here is what happens, what changes when people are not just receivers of benefits, but when they are active agents. Redundancy, but in gathering information and telling authorities what they really need. What changes when we consider? I think it's a point in which in Brazil we are advancing very slowly to consider. In some places, the people are there are some community-based information gathering, but it's very rare yet. And finally, I would like to pose a problem here regarding the municipalities of Brazil. Brazil has 5,500 municipalities of all sizes and all kinds of roles in the urban system. And to consider them a complex system, in fact, they don't interact. But suppose they were to interact. We could get them to interact. Especially to know from each other's experiences, which is a thing that maybe we should conceive the city system as a learning system. I would like you to talk us something about how could we lower coordination costs for this to happen, really. Okay, thank you.
So there's a lot of questions. Let's see if I remember them all. You may have to. So the first thing is sort of the unit of analysis, and I think Patricia brought that up this morning as well. There is no simple unit of analysis ultimately for what a city is. But that problem is not just a problem of cities. So think of, okay, you could say, allow me, where is the end, what's the size of the Earth or the Sun? I mean, there's a sense in which it gets less and less dense, but at some point you'd say, okay, it's here because I have this criterion that the density is low enough, I'll say that that's the case. So cities, because they're dynamical in space, in time as well, people commute in and go to different places, have this additional issue of the dynamics of how people move around in time. But basically, the concept that most people use and that we use in our research is this idea of the city as a socioeconomic interacting system. That means that it's defined by a certain frequency of interactions, effectively. That frequency of interactions is essentially a frequency of interactions implicitly daily. So it's the idea that you belong to the city most of the days throughout the year. And it's implemented usually as definitions of metropolitan areas through commuting flows. So if you have a part of space in which most people or a large fraction of people commute into the center of Brasilia to work, you'd consider that part of Brasilia. That's usually measured by census bureaus. It's an imperfect measure, but that's usually the functional measure. And these usually go by the name of functional cities. Now, I think the problem you were alluding to, and I've discussed this with Bernardo as well, is the political city, which often is quite different. And in Brazil, I understand that's mostly the municipio, right, the municipality. And this takes many forms throughout the world, but it's a big problem, particularly of large cities, because in large cities, the municipality, usually the central municipality or even some of the ones on the outside, can be quite different and deal with very different problems. So there's a problem of coordinating political action, transportation, tax collection across basically places of residence and work. So for example, if you collect taxes at place of work, then the places of residence don't necessarily get that tax revenue to develop their services, which is where people live. But it could also be vice versa. If you collect a place where people live, then the central city, which is the place where the economic activity exists, and that's essential for the whole thing to work, may be mismanaged. So that's really a problem of political integration. For example, in the United States, there are basically no metropolitan authorities, and that creates a lot of issues. If you have a look at the map of New York I was showing, there are parts of Connecticut and New Jersey where people basically escape New York City taxes by being there, even though, of course, their economic model is basically financial and is connected to New York. So this is really a political process to be managed, and usually requires third-party intervention because, there'll be some municipalities that are benefiting and some that are not in the same city, and usually that needs coordination from either central government but that's really a very important problem of governance, and it can be exacerbated when cities grow very fast or need upgrades in their transportation system or something else. Then, let's see, well, the next question is about residuals and...
Where would Brazil lie? Brazilian cities lie?
So, I told you I'm Portuguese, so Brazil is really a special place, and I keep an eye on Brazil and hope it's doing very well, and it's developing fast. The experience of urbanization in Brazil, but also in a lot of Latin America, is now quite old, right? It's a generation old. It happened in most places, except some places in Central America, in the 60s, in the 70s, depending where. So Latin America has been urbanized for a while in most places, but it's really a place, as I showed for Brazil, where that urbanization initially translated into extreme inequality, very high rates of violence, very unequal, disconnected cities. And so at that level, those cities were not good cities. They were not even cities in the sense of, as you said, of interacting populations where you could live in a poor neighborhood and aspire to have the same life in the city as somebody, you know, in Rio, that's very clear, right? Because of the geography. If you are from the Zona Sul, it's very different from Zona Norte if you're from Ipanema. So it's obviously these are different lives, and they're probably, to the point, disconnected lives. So that's not a city. A city is really, as I was trying to argue, a place where these connections are possible and where lives can change. So I think that in the last maybe decade, as you know very well, Latin American cities, and now you really have to discuss country by country, have been changing a lot. There's been consistent economic growth. In Brazil, of course, there was a historical change of government that has promoted policies that integrate more of the populations. A lot of people are coming into the middle class. You know, poor neighborhoods are changing in certain ways that you're the expert on, but you know, there's at least an effort to create a city that is a city of interacting people with opportunities. I'm not the expert to say how far it's coming. I think that you see economic growth. You see also a lot of rising expectations of people wanting life that not only is already better, perhaps, compared to what it was, but they want it to go faster, to be better, to be more democratic. I think that's all good, but you have to manage it from the point of view of government in a way that you use that energy and that expectation for good, to promote positive change, and that's difficult, right? You know all that, okay? But I think it's a time, as I travel, you know, I was just in Colombia, I was also in Medellin. There are many, in Chile, there are many places that feel really that this is the moment for Latin America. Things are changing finally quickly. Societies are developing more balanced ways, and you will have levels, you know, cities that are modern cities with lower violence and so forth. But there are a lot of problems you need to solve as you get there. Particularly, I think, these issues of social integration, opportunity, and then also issues of transportation and pollution and things like this. So São Paulo, I didn't show that slide, but São Paulo and Beijing sort of are rival cities for the largest traffic jam in the world. So you have sort of these. Beijing, I think, is winning, so I should tell you that. So there's that. Then the residuals, I think. I would have liked to say more, and some of the work I mentioned by Brazilian researchers has been exploring this more than we have. And also, I think, with more knowledge of what they mean in the Brazilian reality. So that work is being done. But it's this idea that even though cities are these general places that create this general dynamics, which frankly is the beginning of our research, then you also see that the fact that some cities are richer or poorer than you expect from these general relationships are actually not accidents. They have to do a lot about the history of that city, path dependence, what sectors they have, what levels of violence they have, and sort of that trajectory of development. So that sort of thing we haven't